Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 991. Hubert's Report. With an audible click, a finger kept hitting the tabletop. They were sitting in the meeting room and had just listened to Lydia's report and McCarthy's testimony about the happenings in Emerald City. Seth's index finger couldn't stay still as he mulled over the information in a bad mood. The unclaimed mountains were like a tumor. People being people, exploring the depths of their desires, bringing suffering to almost everyone around them. It already sounded bad when Lydia, Mike, and Ray reported about Morintu and the general situation, but to think that even the places that did well, were hiding such a deep darkness. Hubert's witness report as a victim himself, made Seth lose appetite. According to the dimensional merchant, he still had it better. After his initial escape, he was tortured and crippled so he could not flee, but they had still kept him in a clean apartment, with enough food and drinks. Even the fate of the slaves from Morintu sounded more humane. The man also knew to report of the other places, where the unlucky ones ended up. Prison basements called factories, filled with people held in batteries like chickens, chained down, and harvested for materials. The merchant described classes that could extract mana, life force, and even experience from the captured people to turn them into medicines and potions. It had an eerie similarity to the first time when Master Mountain told them about the berserk pellet. It also reminded him of some of the ballads he had learned himself. Who would have thought that the system also had classes, that would resemble the method of a demonic maestro so closely? If he was honest, Seth would have preferred not to hear about it. They already had so much to worry about and now they faced the question of whether Minasmar should do something about it or not. And if they were to do something, what were they supposed to do about it? Seth was irked, but it wasn't like he could run around the continent and play police everywhere. He couldn't just swoop in and beat up the bad guys and shatter their organization, even if he wanted to. The problem is that we can't move. The magic contract binds us, Seth said frustrated. Was he fine with letting stuff like this happen? No, it was a brewing catastrophe and he had just recently stopped ignoring problems until they knocked at his door. The problem was the agreement. They had signed the magic contract that people affiliated with Minasmar would not interfere with the businesses that ventured into the no man's land to find their own fortune. Of course, there was a loophole, as it only counted for the companies that also signed this contract. The problem was that Emerald City was the seat for two of those. Seeing Seth grinding his teeth, Mary smacked her lips. Then we should leave it to the tree stations to decide and act against it, she suggested. The tree stations? Seth asked as he couldn't quite follow her thought. His is a problem that concerns all of us. All the humans that are left and free enough to care, at least. We signed the contract as Minasmar, the guild, not Minasmar the district. Since all tree stations have their own government, nobody can fault us or them, if they decide to make a move against such happenings, the Chosen of Hestia explained. That was right, it wasn't only Seth, or his friends that would get mad when they heard something like this was happening. The situation was also quite different from that around the scene. The scene had been in control of a full district, and rallying the people back then would have only mounted to smashing an egg against a rock. Now, however, the tree stations were much more organized. They had become their own cities, and the people finally got the chance to further raise their skills and levels. When people were allowed to spend some time in peace, without the constant desperation to survive, they also found the freedom to care for others. With Krana's recent attitude, there was technically no chance they would give a crap. And Minasmar couldn't move. The stations taking action once they published Hubert's fate, seemed like the best chance they had. Although Hubert felt conflicted about broadcasting his terrible fate to the masses, he was ready to do so. Whether it was the fire of revenge or righteousness burning in his eyes was unclear. There is someone else you might be happy about some good publicity, Lydia suddenly added. Seth stared at the massive crystal ball sitting in the center of the table, to get a better look at her face. Maybe we should ask Governor Adam from the Moor Empire to join our meeting? I'm sure he will jump at the chance to publish the Moor Empire's new stance. Right, the Moor Empire was also a big player that had come to Earth. One could even call them the first great villain of the apocalypse. At least for the people of Beta and Y City. With the new emperor and their efforts to make THRES a habitable foothold to reclaim Beta for the people of Earth, what they needed most now was an image change. Soon after it was suggested, Adam joined the meeting between the top brass of Minas AMR. It was the first time Seth actually saw the man himself. The man who ran from trees and the hero you became a monster met for the first time and talked about an alliance. And after their talk, they called the leaders of the individual tree stations and talked about their plans with them. It was a day of conversations that didn't seem to end, but they finally ended eventually. They decided to publish the news soon. Minasmar would even postpone the publicity for the Pythian Games. The leaders agreed that they would at first put political pressure on Emerald City, while Adam volunteered to send troops and infiltrate these factories to gather more evidence and free the people. With more evidence, the cities also agreed to organize volunteers to put military pressure on Emerald City, if need be. Of course, everyone hoped this would blow over without causing the first war among Erdhans in the past 3 centuries. After the meeting, Seth was not in the mood to return to grinding his alchemy. Something weighed on his mind, a point they had not cut it during the meeting, since they were too focused on and shocked by Emerald City's deeds. The cultivators. The fact there had been a cultivator that was able to keep up with Lydia, although she won in the end. It had been over a month since you warned them. According to him, the big wave should only be arriving now, but there were already powerful cultivators with alliances among the locals. Subconsciously, his steps brought him to the training hall. Like almost every day, there were 2 people training with each other. On one side was the towering figure of Tekker, the Bastion, the Keep, hard-pressed to endure and counter the attack of his sparring partner. Although Seth had not expected this outcome exactly, the blacksmith was quite satisfied with the current scene. Pushing Tekker back was an almost 4-meter-tall hunk, with a muscular, dark golden body and the of a ferocious flagon. The 2 Kapesh in his hands exuded a toxic aura, but the creature actually pushed back the tank with pure physical prowess. That was actually Ortega, who had proven worthy to wield the jaws of Apep. The unexpected part was his current appearance, as the god who had chosen him was a complete wild card. Montu, an aspect of Ra symbolizing the destructiveness of the sun. Seth actually had to read up on this god. Although the blacksmith would give wished for a more beastly transformation, he had to admit that Montu was by far the best fit for Ortega and the set of swords. As a high-ranking god of war, his blessing came with a multitude of skills concerning various weapons, especially curved swords like the Kapesh, but also quite a few mystical and magical powers that helped Ortega match the other members of the field teams. The fact that he was able to push Tekker in sparring was proof enough. The blacksmith also had to admit that Ortega's transformation was quite powerful. Although it didn't match the initial aesthetics Seth aimed for, it was in no way less imposing than what Seth originally hoped for. As for the other 2 legendary items, Seth still possessed the Storm of Death. In the end, he had really offered the Harbinger of Winter to Marco. The swordsman had shown great talent in wielding a rapier, greater than anyone else in Mina's March. That was what Jack Felton assured him of. There was also another reason. Seth felt the subconscious urge to give the ice rapier to a girl like Elsa, but he blamed this on the tropes of novels, games, and shows he had watched when he was younger. To go against this trend, he had given it to a slightly short young man, with ruddy brown hair and a sunny disposition. The reason he kept the Storm of Death was very simple. The best possible candidate, Morgana, was a nutjob and couldn't be trusted with so much power. She was a good person overall, otherwise she wouldn't have gotten into the Oath Guard, but she lacked self-control. He couldn't give a nuke to someone prone to throwing temper tantrums. So he kept it until he found a better candidate. His worries calmed down and unwound while watching the impressive fight between 2 giants and simply letting his thoughts flow. Chapter 992 Emblazoned with Flames. The girls were in Little Gamma, so there was no need for him to go home early. After watching the guys train, he felt the urge to go to the workshop. While watching Tekker and Ortega sparring, Seth had also sorted out his thoughts. He found the reason he had been so occupied with this incident. The blacksmith was unsettled because his friends had been in actual danger for the first time. Of course, there were other situations, but this one was unexpected. At no point had he thought that Ray or Lydia couldn't be pushed to the point that they had to flee. Lydia had done well, but she also had 2 holy armaments, and several relic-rated armors as well as a relic-rated armor set. The unsettling part was that having this much was still just enough. Ray only had his legendary ring and he would have died if it wasn't for Solfium descending. Maybe it was arrogant to hope that he could overhear everyone around him to the point that not even the prodigies in the world could harm them, but it had worked for a surprisingly long time. People with great classes caught up with them, cultivators even appeared with comparable weapons and artifacts. He had been very confident in his items and his friends, but this confidence was shaken by the incident in Emerald City. What was the point of all his items and all the golems, if others could catch up or compare? If this situation already happened with the cultivator and his own people, he couldn't underestimate the demons either. The blacksmith brought out 2 of the 3 adamantium bars. Apart from these 2 bars, he also brought out 1 ingot of Erdhan Ithildan, 1 of Mad Ithildan, as well as several more bars of Dwarven Ithildan and Epic Olympian silver. There was little planning involved in his actions as he started heating the forge. What he was most afraid of, was something happening to Mina and Finn, even more than his friends and other people he cared for. Seth didn't want to restrict them, but he couldn't always be there to protect them. What he needed was a guardian. When the blacksmith's deep voice droned through the workshop, Sivri and even Cerberus looked up. Before their eyes, the blacksmith was swallowed by a cloud of fire. It was like the whole area around the anvil had become the furnace. No instrument sounded this time. Instead there was the roaring of a storm, and the striking of the hammer, that accompanied his voice. For a moment, Sivri felt like she was going crazy, when the voice, the blaze, and the strikes shaped into a chaotic piece of music. There was no structure, or meaning she could discern, it was something completely incomprehensible to her mind. The next moment, her heart shuddered, as a dark, demonic presence descended in the workshop. Her mechanical eyes focused on the anvil, where dark runes and an unmistakable haze were melded into an alloy of Ithildan and adamantium. The bright metals were tainted by the demonic runes and the blazing flames. With rhythmic strikes of the hammer and the song of fire, a slender blade took shape. After the blade was forged, he put it aside. No guard, no hilt, no pommel, it didn't look like a finished sword, but Seth made no move to finish it. Leaving the blade aside, he stepped back to the anvil and took the second bar of adamantium and an ingot glinting with a dark red sheen, even in the bright yellow shine of the flames. The whole time, the song had not stopped for once. While the hammer rested, it was a crescendo of voice and fire. Then Karen's obel joined back in, and the dark runes that had waited, suspended in the air, rushed into the metals as the blacksmith heated them with his own flames and began mixing them again. Fold by fold, the metal got darker and darker while the silver and crimson sheen mixed to a metallic color of blood and darkness. Sivri stared and again, was able to see the haze of a soul. What kind of set was the blacksmith making? Or were it 2 separate items? Shortly after, the dwarf golem's view was blocked by the wall of fire, as it changed color to deep murky red and raised the temperature even further. Only the melody of the song indicated that the blacksmith was still working inside the frightening blaze. It was so intense that she feared melting down herself if she tried to get closer. What had happened for him to act like this? Sivri watched on cluelessly. Even the eyes of the silent Cerberus were glued to the cocoon of fire in the middle of the workshop. As the golems watched, the day grew old. People knocked at the door but had to leave with unfinished businesses. At some point, the hammer fell silent, but the blacksmith kept singing. Slowly, the fire subsided, leaving the stage to the skald's solo. Through the gaps in the firestorm, she was able to see that the blacksmith was in the middle of engraving. He had never sung for this long, or kept singing while engraving something. What was he doing? In his hand, she saw a small object shaped like an egg, glinting with dark metallic red. It was not a solid piece of metal but showed very fine and meandering patterns of holes and ridges. Finally, Seth put aside the egg. It had been hours at this point. Yet, he didn't stop. Next, Seth picked a piece of armor from the floor, where the golem had not been able to see it because of the flames. Without stopping, he started working on the armor, cutting grooves and inserting inlays. It finally dawned on Sivri that he was not making a weapon, but a golem. She couldn't remember ever seeing Seth work on a golem since he usually used the golem forge. Even while he was putting in inlays, the dark runes of his demonic song kept floating around and sinking into the armor. At least the color of the fire had turned back to a bright orange and she was able to watch him again. It was a shame she had not been able to see him work on the part of the armor. The dwarven craftsman in her was very curious about what kind of alloy he used for it, if any. Like a machine, the blacksmith worked without tiring and Sivri actually got a little worried for him. But she didn't dare to interfere. From what she had seen, the blacksmith was going to finish soon. The last piece, the cuirass, was already in his hands. At this point, the song changed slightly. A pale blue flame started dancing across the chest of the armor and the dark runes that had been suspended in the air were rapidly sucked into the flames. Erratically, the light jumped about, burning a dark pattern into the surface of the armor. A crest, looking like the setting or rising sun or flame, with stylized rays of fire that covered the whole sky, or in this case the cuirass. Finally, the demonic presence vanished and the fires subsided. Seth assembled the pieces of the armor, and before Sivri's and Cerberus' eyes, he installed the elaborate egg in the chest of the hollow armor like a decorative gem. A wave of mana flooded the armor and it came to live. It was really a golem core. At the blacksmith beckoning, it grabbed the unfinished sword. Substituting the sea of flames, were the waters of Styx, as they appeared as a big floating ball of water. Obediently, the armor golem holding the unfinished-looking blade stepped into the flood, to finally finish the process of its creation. The moment it left the water, it was emblazoned with flame and knelt before its creator. Chapter 993 Basilith. Ding! Your ability compulsive precognition has slightly strengthened. Ding! Your power of existence has risen by 1000 points. Compulsive precognition, an ability that made him prepare for a possible future without really knowing what would happen or how it would help. He didn't know whether it was 100% reliable, but it was never wrong so far. Who would have thought it would improve? What slightly bothered him was the power of existence. 1000 points was 10 times what he usually got for a legendary item, but he had not even gotten a notification that Basilith even was a legend. What could this mean? I obey the master, the hollow voice if the Flame Knight accepted him as its master and distracted him from the notifications. Seth looked down at the new golem he had just created with the blessing of Zaphon, the burning skies. To create a guardian he had blown many of his safety measures into the wind and directly worked closely with Zaphon, one of the demons he knew the longest. The blacksmith had also paid quite a heavy price. Zaphon had been picky, forcing Seth to offer him the remaining soul fragments of the 24th Ethnarch, summing up to 80 big and 200 medium-sized ones. In addition to that, he also took the soul of the dire leopard, massive, rare, Seth had received from Tunomol. Still, the bard had deemed this trade acceptable. He had pulled no punches. What he got in exchange was a golem with part of Zaphon's fire elemental powers, further enhanced by Seth's trait kin of fire, wielding a flaming sword made of an alloy of Ithildan and adamantium and possessing a core of adamantium and mad Ithildan. Okay, Basilith. You can rise. As you see, I held word. Seth commanded the Fire Knight. Basilith was the name of the golem, inherited from the soul's ego. The spirit blacksmith directly infused the soul of the crowned blaze cat, big, rare, ego, into the sword and core of the golem. Yes, you have really left my soul intact. I once again swear my allegiance to you, Basilith assured once again. The crowned blaze cat was a demonic beast that usually lived in fiery hellscapes and was close to the demon race. They had a circle of golden horns on their head called a crown and would only develop an ego once their crown fully grew after several centuries. Basilith was a proud creature, although it had already died, he only offered his cooperation after Seth swore that he would not modify his soul. Since he wasn't allowed to enchant it, Seth directly melded the soul into the metal of the sword blade, the inlays and the core, enchanting the first with the white hilt circuit and the last with the generic automaton core circuit, and made up for the lack of other enchantments, by infusing the whole body with Zaphon's powers. Can you control the power of your new body? Seth asked, curious how the ego soul and the automaton circuits would work together. As an answer, the golem let go of the blade, which started floating in the air, surrounded by a fiery halo. While the armor started to show a set of various fighting techniques and magic, the sword acted independently, slashing, stabbing, and activating magic in the air. Instead of splitting my consciousness, I can move it back and forth, leaving the control of the other part to the enchantment. I also feel barely any discomfort because of the structure of this vessel, the blaze cat gave its verdict. Seth nodded, he was glad it worked out. That only leaves one last test, Seth said and suddenly rushed forward. Radiant Forge right glinted as Seth's fight smashed into the chest of the armor golem. Basilith clatters and stepped back, a deep, fist-shaped dent in its chest, right where the sun crest could be seen. Repair yourself, Seth commanded, shaking his hand, to get rid of the pain. After all, he had just smashed his fist into an alloy of Olympian silver and imported Ithildan. Since he had not infused the blaze cat's soul only into the sword and the core, he still had to see whether his other measures were able to make up for this. The knight nodded. I will try. The dented crest on the chest of the cuirass started lighting up and the fires surrounding the armor were concentrated on itself and brought it to a red-hot glow. Slowly, the metal started moving and the dented chest mended itself. Good, but what if I do this? Seth asked and slashed out with the draconic blade, severing the hollow arm. The severed arm didn't even drop to the floor, held in place by the fire of the golem. The gunmetal grey armor heated up at the cut and welded back together like there never was any damage. Very good, Seth praised, This time the repair was not just faster, but it also showed that Bazalith had instinctively understood how to use the power of Zafin in junction with the soul-filled inlays to detect damages without looking. It was a different, more cost-effective way of repairing itself. "Sivri, what time is it?" he asked the golden dwarf that had kept watching the whole time. "It's evening now, I was working through the whole night," he asked surprised. "Of the second day now." Sivri ended her sentence. "What?" the blacksmith exclaimed shocked. He had been working for 2 days straight? He didn't feel tired at all, but he had also been surrounded by flames the whole time. "Didn't anyone come to find me?" he asked confused. Even if he didn't notice because of his stamina recovery, others would have come looking for him. "Nobody," Sivri answered, rending his heart. I was just joking. I sent the people that came away and silenced the other things, so they wouldn't disturb your work," the golem assured him hastily, seeing his depressed look. Seeing her so worried about the little joke gone wrong actually made the bard chuckle, quickly lifting his mood. "I'm okay, now. Thanks, Sivri. You did well. Are Finn and Mina still in Little Gamma?" He wanted to find the two quickly. After all, Bazalith was meant for the two as a bodyguard they could take along in their inventory. "I don't know," the dwarf pondered. "They were not among the people coming for you and nobody mentioned them, so they are, probably," she finally said. "It's okay. I will ask Lena or Mary later." "What did the people that came say?" the blacksmith asked curiously while storing Bazalith. Although he would probably hear from the other two later, it was better if he knew what was coming. "It seems that Galwell, the guy with the hammer, contacted us and they said something about someone returning. They didn't really explain and left when I told them you were occupied," she answered with a smile. Although it was not incredibly helpful, it was not her fault. "Thanks, Sivri. I guess I will go looking for Mary or Lena then. Bye." The blacksmith left and connected with the tower ego, finding out where Mary and Lena were. The ego also confirmed that the members of Yule Cat's Fur were not in the tower. After what Sivri had said, he thought that maybe one of the teams that went off to the other world had returned, but none of them were in the tower, either. Like always, the administrative heads were in the embassy above ground. "Tower Master. The lady is currently in a meeting. Could you wait for a moment?" The secretary at the reception desk stopped when he attempted to walk directly to Mary's office. "Who is she meeting with?" Seth asked, since had nothing better to do but wait. "Arim, let me see her. It's Mr. Evan and Lady Karina. The meeting concerns the completion of the main tunnel for the subway," she explained after looking through Mary's schedule. "Oh, so they are finished? Good, I already meant to ask how that project was going." Seth said and made small talk as they waited for the meeting to conclude. "Seth!" Evan and Karina exclaimed when they came out of the office. "Hey guys! I heard you finished the subway tunnels." Finally, Karina said in a tone that made it clear that she didn't like working with Evan. "It's on Baker and his engineers now to build the trains," Evan added, ignoring the Dryad's attitude. Good, if you would excuse me, I needed Mary for a moment." "You finally got out of your workshop and the first thing you do is come here? I don't remember you being that responsible," Mary teased, leaning in the door frame of her office. Ha, sorry. It's okay. I'm sure you wanted something, so tell me quickly." "I have something I need to give to Mina and Finn and I wanted to ask you about the situation in Little Gamma," he summed it up. "Good timing, you can meet with Galwell at the same time. Gamma Resistance wants to join Adam on his operation in Emerald City," Mary adeptly added a task to his trip. "Not that I am against it, but how did he even know about it?" Seth asked a little surprised. Although they published the situation in Emerald City, Adam's actions were only known to the higher UPS for now. Apart from his guild, he is part of Little Gamma's government. He requested Minasmar for support in gear and equipment. "I think we should give them some of the good stuff, but I know you don't want to hand that out without a safety precaution." "Oh, I get it. All right, I will do that, too." Seth agreed and they spent some more time, talking about the details before Seth made his preparations and set off. Chapter 994. Some truths were better left unspoken. Little Gamma. Who would have thought those lowly guys were useful for something? As they said, it was worth monitoring this building, a man whispered to his partner. They were hiding in the crowd opposite the System Church in Little Gamma. "Is that really him?" his partner asked in a hushed voice, stealing a glance at the sketch in his hands. It's definitely him. We have to inform the sect master, the first said and started writing characters on a paper crane. After whispering to the origami creature, it suddenly crumbled into a tiny ball, becoming smaller and smaller until it vanished in a space anomaly. Why can't we just grab him? I guess he is quite tall and muscular, and kinda handsome, but he's just a savage who has not cultivated chi, she asked eagerly. Her partner stared at his martial sister for a moment before he sighed. You didn't read the mission pamphlet again. Don't underestimate him because he looks like nothing much. That's the guy who beat Guardian Ho until he was only a nascent soul and destroyed the Alliance's base single-handedly. Also, please keep yourself in check, we are on a mission. You are just jealous. Do you think the sect master will come personally then? Her martial brother shook his head. The sect master is not that free right now. Did you forget that he helps the great masters with the barrier at the rift? He will probably send some elders and inner disciples listening to him. She couldn't help but glance at the huge tree whose crown covered the sprawling exotic city below and the strange barrier that protected the place. With what you just said, do you think that will be enough? She asked unsure. The two of them were able to smuggle themselves in by the virtue of their stealth techniques and a device they purchased from the dark path that had operated for longer in this world. She doubted the elders or one of the seniors from the inner sect would stoop so low as to sneak in through a tiny hole in the barrier. Don't underestimate our Silk River sect. Some of the inner sect seniors have already reached spirit severing. And please, remember to use secret thought transmission when we talk about sect matters, he cautioned her. Fine, fine, she said and switched to thought transmission. Should we follow him? Carefully he agreed and the two started following the tower master from a great distance after he left the branch of the system church. Since the tree stations were their property, Minas Mar obviously had their own branch here. It was a great tree building, right beside the main tree's trunk. This was the place members of Minas Amr and the Oath Guard were living when staying in Little Gamma. Seth leisurely made his way over, taking in the scenes of the city. It had been a while since he got out and it was kind of his first time visiting Little Gamma since it became Little Gamma. Although the districts were hotpots of the people of Earth, after centuries they had developed their own distinct cultures. This became very prominent when one compared Little Sigma, Little Gamma, and Delta. Especially the cuisine in the restaurants was quite different. Districts like Epsilon, Beta, and Sigma had many fish dishes because they had access to the ocean or inland sea. Gamma on the other hand offered a very savory palate much closer to what Seth knew from his own home, Avernum. Delta offered a mix of everything since it used to be more like a representative district and seat of government where people from everywhere lived. It had never been this prominent to Seth, although he knew about it. The difference became very obvious because many people changed their classes to something fit for more stable jobs, now that they lived in a safe place. This meant that lately a lot of people became chefs and opened their own restaurants, seeking to recreate the tastes of their lost homes. Some of them also go quite experimental, cooking up monster meats in the style of their homes, using various herbs to spice things up. Bravely, Seth tested a bunch of street foods that were even exotic to him, who traveled a foreign world. He tried some of the tamer ones like orc sausages or slime slushies. He feasted until he finally came to the entrance of their branch building, rubbing his hands. He had deliberately not called the two girls, to surprise them with his visit. He had made the deal with Mary, that she told them that she would send someone to deal with Galwell, but not who she would send. Seth, a high-pitched voice exclaimed. The blacksmith didn't get the chance to push open the doors before he had someone charge into him. The moment she saw him, Finn in human form rushed out and directly tackled him to the ground. Why didn't you call us that you would come? She asked, slowly crushing his rib cage as she hugged him with all her strength. Finn, calm down a little, the more mature voice of Mina could be heard as she stepped into his field of view, offering a hand to help him up. The fairy was still tightly wrapped around him when the cat girl pulled him onto his feet. Finally, Finn lets go of him, only to create a gap for Mina to swoop in and steal a passionate kiss. My turn. Finn complained and demanded her greeting, too. So, you are the one Mary told us about. It makes sense if you are the one who has to deal with Galwell, Mina commented, after their greeting. Yep, I will meet him a little later. How about you guys show me the city in the meantime? You were here a little longer than me, he suggested a light stroll. Oh, great. I have lots of stuff you have to try, like Minotaur tongue and pudding, Finn cheered excitedly, naming some of the more exotic food he had evaded so far. From an alley not too far away from the branch building, two hidden pairs of eyes had watched the entire scene. Did you see that, brother? The martial sister asked, her face the color of a tomato. Feeling the heat rise to her head, she looked over to her martial brother as he stayed silent. The man's face was pale and frozen. Was that a tear in the corner of his eye? Brother, relax your hand. Your palms are bleeding, she explained in shock, seeing that he had balled his fists so hard that his nails dug into his palms. At her call, she seemed to finally regain his senses and swallowed hard. This lucky, it's good to know. This bastard has a weakness. We should report this to the sect master, it might come in handy, he said, his voice wavering as he kept his emotions under control. No need to be jealous, brother. Those are standards you will never reach, so there is no use dreaming of it. I'm sure you will find one, too. Maybe. I mean, with your face, you can definitely make one of the less ugly servants fall for you. Or maybe you find a fairy without standards, she evaluated him objectively. You are being too cruel, her partner mumbled, not amused. I'm just stating the honest truth, brother. Some truths are better left unspoken, he said angrily and walked off. Follow me, we can't lose them now. He called her with thought transmission. She shook her head in pity. Did I hurt his feelings? I just don't want him to get his hopes up and get hurt later on, she thought to herself and hurriedly followed him. Should she tell him? Some truths were better left unspoken. She remembered his words and kept her intentions to herself. She could only hope her fellow disciple's Deo heart wouldn't crumble in the future when he flew too high just to get mercilessly shot down. Chapter 995 Elder Gak. The three got food from some of the places Finn recommended and sauntered around the city. After strolling around Little Gamma for an hour or three, they finally ended up at the headquarters of Gamma Resistance, where they met WellRoad already waiting at the entrance. Seth, you are here. I'm glad you were able to make it, he greeted Seth and then the other two, before asking them to come inside. The reason Seth had come here personally was because Galwell had asked for epic and relic-rated gear for their move to Emerald City. These were the items Cerberus was making unceasingly. Usually, they were kept in their vault for members to purchase and only a few were delivered to their shop for the public to acquire. Minasmar made no secret about having a lot of them but only selling a few. Heck, their whole oath guard was clad in relic-rated items. But even their own members had to sign the soul contract to make sure these items would not be used against Mina's march. This was why Seth played the delivery man. The infernal Scald was the only one who could make the frightening soul contracts. Would normal magic contracts have sufficed? Maybe, but it induced much more fear if the soul was at stake. So, you are saying, that we have to sign these contracts to purchase or lend your items? Galwell asked, pondering after Seth explained to him the procedure. Exactly, it's just a safety measure to stop people from using them against us or deliberately selling them to hostile forces. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel positive about putting so many on the open market, the blacksmith explained. After all, they were talking about 200 sets of relic armor and 300 individual weapons. Can we talk about the price? The leader of Gamma Resistance gulped when he saw what all of this came to. He had confidently asked for relic-rated equipment, but it seemed that he had no idea about the actual market value. Apart from the 300 weapons, with each armor set having 5 to 6 parts, meaning that the whole order came to over 1,300 pieces of relic-rated gear. Even the cheapest relic wouldn't go below 80 gold. They were talking about tens of thousands. There was no way Galwell had that money. But Seth came prepared. There is nothing I can do about the price, but we might be able to come up with a financing plan, or I could lend them to you, which would be infinitely cheaper. Seth's sweet voice fluttered into the ears of the financially struggling leader. Chosen of tier or not, it couldn't help him with the lack of money. The question was whether he would take on the burden of crippling debt in the name of Gamma Resistance, or lending. How much would it cost? His tongue was heavy when he finally spat out his answer. He decided to blow a lot of money for a restricted trial period. Seth smiled internally, but on the outside, he only showed a pondering face, as if he was calculating it only now. Of course, he had already talked about the final pricing with Mary, long before coming here. Why were they already planning to lend it to them from the start? Obviously, because they would be able to fleece them twice. They would get to try out the indescribable power-up that came from a fully enchanted armor set in a relic-rated weapon. If they offered the people of Gamma Resistance to purchase them afterward, would they be able to resist blowing their private funds once they got hooked on the feeling? At that point, they would get money from the organization as well as its individual members. A clean, crisp 7,000 gold for the length of the operation, but at most half a year. I will even add these rare-rated cloth armors to be worn below the armor sets, for free. Seth sweetened the deal, by offering the padded jackets he made for practice using ancient bronze. They were the shirts the other enchanters apart from Grant already had their fun with, so they had a wild mix of various effects. Hearing the number Seth dropped, Roparts let out a breath of relief, although he was still looking very serious. Compared to the purchase price, the renting price came down to about 5 gold per piece. 7,000 was a lot of money, but it was definitely doable with Gamma Resistance's funds, and it was an insurance that would increase their survival rate tremendously. Are you sure about that? Galwell asked again, to make sure he had not misunderstood. It's just a small change in the soul contract, nothing big, the blacksmith assured him with a big nod. Galwell didn't dare ponder any longer. Deal. Thank you so much, the Chosen of Tyr thanked him profusely, unaware of what Minas Mar was actually plotting with their overly advantageous offer. Why would he doubt their willingness to help? After all, it was Minas Mar who had published the information. It followed a relative boring meet and greet with the 200 people that would receive the items, during which they all signed their names on the soul contract for lending the gear, one by one. It boring, but Seth had to be present for the contract to be valid. Phew, that one's finally over with, he exclaimed, leaving the headquarters of Gamma Resistance after handing Galwell all the items from his inventory. Now, they just had to wait for the money to flood in once the situation in Emerald City was solved. They had just stepped out to the streets when they heard a rising commotion. A flying object had appeared in the sky, aiming toward the guardian tree. Suddenly a kind of flare rose to the crown of the from a street close by. The trail of light rose into the darkening sky and hit the city barrier. Instantly, the object sped up toward this point. Just before crashing into the barrier, it shot out 5 pins. Shockingly, the 5 pins created a pentagonal hole in the dimly glowing barrier. This allowed the ship to leisurely pass the barrier and enter the city. It was the first time the people of Earth saw someone do this to a barrier, but nobody panicked. The flying ship came to a halt, floating in the sky, just below the tree's crown. A door opened and 3 figures came out, walking in the air with relaxed steps. Their presence and bearing were imposing, their exotic robes elegantly billowing in the wind. In the center was an older man with a pencil mustache and his graying hair bound back into a bun. To his left and right were 2 attractive young people. An alluring beauty to the left and a handsome, fragile-seeming man to the right. Ignoring the view of the crowd, they walked forward, slowly descending toward where the flare was fired. However, they were stopped by several of Little Gamma's guards, blocking their path with the help of flying mounts. They were not part of Minas Mar, but the local police force. Although there were golem stations in every tree station, they were set to keep public order and stop fights, not enact all laws. You are illegally trespassing on the territory of the autonomous city of Little Gamma. Identify yourself, their leader called out, unimpressed by their entrance show. The middle-aged man looked at the native as if he was looking at an annoying fly. However, he did not let the chance go to pompously announce their names. I'm Elder Gak of the Great Silk River Sect. These are my disciples, Badam and T.S. Now step aside, vermin. I will spare your life only once, he announced arrogantly and suddenly appeared behind the squad of policemen, continuing his descent. Stop where you are, Mr. Gak, Mr. Badam, Ms. T.S. I cannot let you enter the city without a thorough investigation, the guard called out to stop them when the disciples followed their master's example. Before anyone could question the guard leader's bold actions, Elder Gak had already unsheathed his blades and slashed at the group of people on their flying mounts. The relaxed flick with the weapon created a massive crescent of energy that shot at the group, threatening to cut them apart. Mina and Finn were about to jump forward, but Seth held them back. This place had its guardians, there was no need for them to steal the show. What happened next was the most surprising, for Elder Gak, as his attack of blade energy missed. The flying creatures were gone, and he found the people riding them hanging in the tree, tangled up by vines. How? This question was written on his face, but he didn't have much time to think about it, as golem knights started dropping from the tree crown like ripe fruits. Golems couldn't fly, but they were robust and had a strong grip. The cultivators sauntering through the air were suddenly weighed down by several hundred kilograms of armored attacks that dragged them down at terrifying speeds. While the inner disciples crashed to the ground, Elder Gak managed to evade and counterattack, slicing several golems like he was playing Fruit Ninja. Elder Bad Gak leave 115. It was no surprise that the golems that ranged around the strength of a Level 75 player couldn't do much against a cultivator. Mina and Finn looked at Seth, but he shook his head. Some golems were not a loss. These were the same golem knights without a soul he sold to Arjit Noor. Although they would not recover, they would simply send them to Mount Agra where Cormac Pale could repair them. On the ground, the disciple Badam Leave 99 and TS Leave 96 were holding their own against the golems once they regained their composure. Their robes had gotten dirty in the impact, but there were no wounds at all. The crowd watching had quickly dispersed when the fights moved to the streets. Suddenly, Elder Gak moved right above Seth's position, his eyes glued to the blacksmith still wearing casual attire. "You are the maggot that hurt Little Ho and killed our disciples," he spoke with sparks in his eyes. A tremendous pressure descended on Seth and the surrounding crowd. Despite the situation, he seemed to remember. Little Ho, Seth felt like that name was familiar. Finally, it clicked. It was the man with the fat meteor sword. Right, he was also from the Silk River sect, now he remembered. "If you don't resist, I will spare your life. I will simply cripple you and bring you to the sect leader," he threatened. "Big words for snake food," Seth scoffed confidently. "Snake food." They were his last words, before vanishing in the maw of a giant snake that ascended from below ground. The guardian of Little Gamma had made her appearance. Chapter 996 Primordial Silver Blade. Badam and TS looked up in shock, seeing their master vanish in the throat of a snake barely fitting in between the massive buildings of the city. There was no more sign of him, not even screams. He had just vanished. The gap in their defense resulted in a thorough pelting by the surrounding golems. The brave onlookers that stayed despite the fight, fell into uproarious cheers. It was the whole reason they stayed. They had waited with bated breath for Python to appear. The giant snake golem may have looked menacing to outsiders, but these people she was simply a benefactor. Many had their lives saved, directly or indirectly, during travels in the vicinity of Little Gamma, as it was Tetzel's mother who kept the area clean of high-level monsters. She was their guardian and they had faith in her protection. That was what Seth knew from the intel, but he only started to believe it now. Seeing how the people had stayed mostly calm, despite someone breaching their barrier and invading the city. What else was it, if not the confidence in their protectors? The blacksmith waited for a moment, to let Python bask in her moment of glory, then he slightly knocked at the hardened leather plates that made up her skin to get her attention. The snake, sticking about 1/3 of her length out of the ground, slowly bent down to look at him. "I'm interested in his blade. Can you spit it out for me?" he asked her, using telepathy. "Sure. It's just scratching up my insides, anyway," she answered disinterestedly. The maw opened just a little and a bright blade fell out. It was full of scratches, dents, notches, and a little bent out of shape. The storm of sand and rocks that filled Python, if she wasn't used as a troop transporter, that ground Elder Gak to dust had left its marks on the blade. To his surprise, Seth was able to appraise the blade just fine with his eyes of the maestro. Were the Elder's actions enough for the system to scan the blade, or had the system already expanded to the voracious cloud continent? Elder Gak's primordial silver blade broken. Legendary. Physical attack 2700-500. Mag attack 2500-700. Durability, 0. 1 plus 200% on energy-based attacks. 2 plus 150% defense against dark magic and curses. 3 plus 120% resistance against mind effects. 4 plus 50% poison resistance. 5 active skill, Soaring Immortal, unusable because of the state of the item. A blade forged from primordial silver used by Elder Bad Gak of the Silk River sect. Looted from an ancient tomb, its original owner and maker have been long forgotten. Curious, Seth checked the new entry in his material catalog, however, there was not much to look at. Primordial silver, a scarce metal found on the voracious cloud continent. Called the Mother of Silver, it has the ability to purify the mind and body from evil energy. It simply reiterated what he could already see from the effects of the sword itself. The only thing remaining was the active skill. Active skill, Soaring Immortal, cost, 3000 mana/2000 chi. Allows the user to traverse space like an immortal to a maximum distance of 25 meters. It was a blink skill. And one without restrictions, unlike his Scorpio Star Escape. It didn't even have a cooldown, just very high mana costs. The more surprising thing was that it also stated a chi cost. Now Seth was almost certain that the system was expanding to the invading continent. It actually started quantifying chi, just like mana, or health. If the sword had been in a better condition, Seth would have felt conflicted about melting it down, but currently, it looked like someone shot at it with an automatic rifle. There was no saving it. But in the end, this was a blessing in disguise. He wouldn't take it apart and recycle it without a bad conscience. Although he couldn't see any obvious engraving, Seth hoped it was not some kind of magic cultivator technique that was used to enchant the sword. In that case, he might be able to reverse engineer the enchantment using his eyes of the maestro once he started disassembling it. Pocketing the blade, he returned to reality. Things were not over yet. The two disciples had managed to recover their bearing, although with a bunch of bruises more, and were desperately trying to get out of the mob of golems attacking them. Stop those things this instant! Seth suddenly heard someone command from behind. A figure had appeared behind Mina and Finn and were threatening them with 2 daggers at their throats. Haha, you damn beast! I know your weakness. Let the seniors off or we will kill your lovers, the man threatened with satisfaction. The blacksmith had no chance to give an answer, before the two found out that his weakness wasn't as weak as they suspected. They were not supposed to reveal themselves, but things had taken a dire turn. The elder was gone and the seniors from the inner sect had a hard time fending off their attacker. These two were promising seeds, they couldn't allow them to die in this backwater. While the martial sister fled, to stay as a spy, he took it upon himself to take revenge for all single men for Elder Gak. And save the 2 seniors, even if it meant sacrificing his position and maybe his life. As he thought, the man didn't dare to move when the lives of his little treasures were in danger. The tower master opened his mouth. Was he going to talk back? Would he beg for his lovers to be spared? Yes, he felt incredible satisfaction, looking forward to seeing this man grovel before him. But before a single sound left his victim's lips, the world suddenly went dark. He froze. Had he gone blind? What had the enemy done to him? He tried to keep his cool, the blades in his hands didn't waver, despite his racing heart and thoughts. However, shock filled his mind when he realized that he no longer felt the resistance of soft skin against his blades. His hostages were gone. Seething pain filled his stomach, as if his waist was stabbed by a dozen swords. What witchcraft was that? Us becoming hostages, a smoky voice whispered close to his ears. Dream on, another shouted, and the darkness was ripped apart by searing light and a tiny golden bullet illuminated the night and crushed his skull with a single hit. The last thing he felt was pain before he slipped into the darkness. In the darkness, he suddenly felt an inescapable suction. Was he going to return to the cycle of reincarnation? After his weakness got rid of the attacker, Seth stepped toward the fight between the golem knights and the 2 cultivators. Surrender now and I won't even see the need to cripple you, Seth offered them gracefully, giving back a rendition of their master's words. Ha! You think that Wowlug? Badam was about to give a rebellious answer when... Bang bang, Maxwell's silverhammer came down onto his head. Galwell had appeared in the crowd of golems and used the chance to take out the guy. Weighing the hammer in his hand, he turned to the female cultivator. I surrender, she quickly gave up, facing the menacing figure of Galwell. Seeing the woman surrender, Seth pondered for a moment. Was this maybe the situation he originally created Bazalith for? No, no. Python and the others were able to deal with it. Was the situation that triggered compulsive precognition further in the future? Galwell, can I leave these guys to you? Seth asked, pointing at Badam and T.S. He had thought of harvesting their souls like he did with the guy Finn flattened, but he thought these 2 might prove more useful later on. Ah, that could be hard, Galwell said, embarrassed. We don't have the manpower to keep people like this under control, he explained, mentioning another point the blacksmith had noticed. The 2 disciples had destroyed almost 30 golem, while their master cut apart another 15 in midair. Golems without souls were good to make money off, but they couldn't keep up with the cultivators. They also couldn't grow to keep up with them at some point. Maybe it was time for a trip. For now, Seth put the 2 into Legion space where the golems put them into chains. Chapter 997. Someone to introduce. Let's go back now. I still have someone to introduce to you. The trio said their farewells to Galwell and left the scene of the incident. Returning to the branch building, Seth pushed his thoughts to the back of his mind and concentrated on spending time with Mina and Finn. So, you said you had something to show us? Finn asked expectantly once they reached the suite where Yulkat's fur was staying at. Someone to introduce to you, he corrected her. This is Bazalith. I hope you two can take him along as a trump card, Seth announced as he brought out the flaming knight from his inventory. The knight with the soul of a demon beast bowed respectfully before the two ladies. Whoa, we are getting our own Wolfram! Finn exclaimed excitedly, climbing around on the golem knight. Mina on the other hand observed the knight thoroughly, walking around it. Okay. I like its style. It looks agile and quick. Despite being a plate armor, the shadow assassin acknowledged Seth's work with a nod. Seth's fear that they might be offended because his gesture showed a lack of confidence in their strength was unfounded. Neither of them argued against taking a trump card along, they were happy about the blacksmith's present. Does that mean you are leaving again? Mina asked perceptively. What use was a guardian, if the strongest guy was right by their side? Originally, I wanted to stay with you a while longer, but my plans have slightly changed, Seth admitted. Seeing how the mass-produced golems without a soul couldn't keep up with the cultivators had led him to make a decision. The problem wasn't their physical stats. It was the fact that golems without a soul not only lacked growth, but they also had little potential to learn skills. Skills were a big part of the power in the system. This was also why the golems only rivaled Leave 75, despite having much more powerful attributes. The golem knights he made originally, were able to inherit, remaster, and improve skills contained in their souls from when they were alive and could even learn new skills, given time. The things Seth needed for them were souls and some fitting bodies in the best case. The blacksmith had a good idea of where to get both. He had business there anyway. Don't worry, I will stay for today, Seth assured them when he saw Finn looking down and Mina's tail swinging listlessly. Staying a day or two, what was the damage? 2 days later, Holy Land. What are you doing? We had a deal. A darkness befell the toxic wasteland as a somber tune had the world shaking along with the sound of the hurdy-gurdy. Rock was breaking and the landscape ripping apart, exposing the vast network of tunnels and vents, that all led to the Maestro's subterranean laboratories. Black goop crawled from the cracks, taking the shape of an anthropomorphic ibex, pitifully complaining to the infernal skald who was solemnly playing his tune, demolishing the landscape in the process. The tune fell silent as Seth stopped turning the crank. We did have a deal, but do you think I don't know that it was you who gave Dragos the information that we went to the abyss? Before he perished, he talked about it. He desperately told us anything, just to end his life, the bard said with a cold smile. The dark little toad shivered as if these words wormed themselves deep in its body. Listen, that doesn't matter. It happened before the deal, he asserted weakly. That's right. That's also why I'm not here for you especially. I happen to need a soul and I was thinking of offering you to source it for me. It would be best if it was multi-talented, like you, and specialized in alchemy, like you. You get the drift, right? Get me another maestro like yourself, and you are off the hook, the skald made a sensible offer to spare the demon's life. The ibex froze for a moment, just staring at him with its goat eyes. I know someone just like that. He's a rival of mine and just as no. Worse than me. Much worse, yes. He's very also talented in alchemy, almost as better than me even, the demon assured him in a hurry, once he thought of a fitting victim. I can contact him and lure him here within a few days. Seth squinted at the demon. Although he would have preferred to get it immediately, however, it was also convenient. He planned to stay in the Holy Land for a while. The demon was actually the afterthought, compared to his actual goal, collecting souls. I will return in 5 days. The bard gave him a deadline and returned to the Adventurer Guild's Labyrinth City. Seth didn't have Tetzel or Puffles with him, so he was riding Dridgetum, the golem griffin back. The Labyrinth City had already started changing. Buildings like the Adventurer Guild and Merchant Guilds were already finished, while many inns and shops had already taken shape. Things had started changing quicker and quicker after the guild finally established its own teleportation formation. Although foreign adventurers would have a hard time on Earth, unless they had special blessing, foreign merchants started flocking to the Labyrinth City. It was still the beginning, but it greatly increased the speed of the city's growth. Tenno, are you ready to set out? He asked the demon when he entered their room. Since the demon had been looking for some change, Seth had decided to take him along. He was much more useful to him than in a dungeon raid, anyway. Yeah. I prepared all the materials, but are you sure you want to do this on your own? He asked because Seth had brought neither his pets nor friends along. We aren't as alone as you may think, he said mysteriously. Let's go. After picking up the demon, they walked to the branch of the Adventurers Guild. It was bigger than usual, but it had everything one would expect. A billboard with quests, a counter with a group of receptionists, a bar. Seth leisurely walked to the billboard. There were many quests corresponding to monster territories that had spread on the surface and dungeons that had to be culled. The most prominent quests were about the various territories and dungeons the spreading Kazdam kingdom of orcs owned. He knew from Bryce that these quests were actively avoided by adventurers, allowing Kazdam to grow into a looming danger for the future of the Labyrinth City. The blacksmith visited the guild master and offered his help with the problem when Bryce mentioned it. When the bard shared his plan, the guild master also provided him with something he needed to do what he did next. Decisively, Seth grabbed more than half of these quests concerning Kazdam and brought them to the front desk, to acknowledge them. The receptionist already had a hard time keeping her business smile, when she saw the new adventurer approach with a whole stack of quests in his hand. "Sir, I fear you can't acknowledge that many quests at once. Please understand, that this is about your safety, as well for the sake of other adventurers. If you take that many quests, how will others make a living?" she tried to explain friendly. Wordlessly, Seth placed his new adventurer license on the desk between them. "SSSS rank adventurer," she exclaimed in shock. That was right, the guild master himself had gone through the process to make him a SS rank adventurer's license. With this, there was no doubt about his strength. "As you can see, you don't have to worry about me. And all of these are Kazdam quests. Nobody wants to do these." Yes, I see. It's different if you are a SS rank." "Okay, I will process these quests for you," she agreed quickly and started registering the quests. She didn't even ask about his party, this was the power of rank. She let go of any worry or standard procedure the moment he showed his card. Ding! "You have accepted a quest." Ding! "You have accepted a quest." Ding! "You have accepted a quest." "Okay, that's everything. I registered them under your name, do you need the papers back?" "No, it's okay. I can see them in my quest log." "Alright, then good luck," she sent him off with a smile. Chapter 998 Pushing the Border. Adventurer Guild's Holy Land, border of Kazdam. The kingdom of Kazdam had grown further after the last time Seth was here. It now reigned over a vast part of the surface and upper levels of the canyon. Many of the dungeon entrances were now fortified with manned garrisons, while the orcs deeper in the heartland actually started building villages and farms. One could have gotten the notion the orcs were intelligent or civilized, but those who had these ideas and tried to approach them for trade or negotiations quickly landed in soups. They were different from the old Moor Empire that tried to conquer the land and its people. After failing in the abyss, the orcs only wanted the land because of their exploding population. They didn't care for power or control. One could say they were settlers, not conquerors. Since they couldn't be talked to or reasoned with. "I finished setting up the formation. You can start at any time now," Tinamole informed him as he returned to Seth's side, riding on a demonic creature that looked like a seven-eyed lizard. The direction he came from was their first target. In the distance was a small garrison, built on a shallow cave-style dungeon. It was one of the newest orc dungeons and relatively small, according to the guild. It was fortified by a stone wall, raised with earth magic, and fortified further with wards and a barrier. It was better than the one Seth had visited previously to test Hoskin. No wonder the common adventurer avoided Kazdam quests. Once they fortified it, it was like having to siege a city, but the bounty, the dungeon, and the experience it protected were not worth the effort. It was good that Seth was not here for the dungeon loot or experience. "Alright, then let's do this quickly," he said and went to work. Seth had a stack of almost 50 quests in his inventory and wasn't in the mood to waste time. The salamander skin below his armor flared up as he activated Kager's fire magic. The Trignus gloves unlocked advanced spells of fire magic belonging to the system for Seth. Kager's fire magic allowed him to access the magic of the fire demon, which went in a different direction, unlocking a variety of demon spells. For example, Demon Flame Meteor, he cast, not needing to do a chant thanks to quick cast of the Cloak of Hecate. From far above in the sky, a meteor shaped like a burning demon skull, enveloped in dark fire started descending toward the barrier of the garrison. The roaring of the meteor seemed like the cry of the skull and it crashed into the barrier. The barrier held on, but not for long, as a second skull followed the first, thanks to the cloak's double cast. The demon flame meteor was weaker than ultimate fire spells like explosion or the actual meteor spell, but it was good enough for the first step. When the barrier was shattered, Seth waited for a moment as a tumult started in the garrison. Orcs frantically sounded alarm and soldiers manned the walls while spellcasters tried to repair the barrier. This was what he had wanted. The next moment, the garrison was bathed in bright light, as if the sun had broken through the layers of clouds, and decided to focus on the orcs alone. The rays of light split into exactly 300 as they fell on the garrison as a target-seeking rain of death. Seth had lured the orcs into the open and simply fired Apollo's rain of light using the Mind Reaper bow. The kill notification rang incessantly in his head for the next 10 minutes. Almost 200 orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins ranging from level 50 to 65. Despite Apollo's rain of light only made magic damage, which the Mind Reaper didn't have, all of them died. Although Seth had switched back to the sky set to improve his base magic damage and had many other items that improved the power of the light arrows, the main point was the Mind Reaper's effects of aiming for vitals, as well as causing stun and decay. Many died over the course of 10 minutes, because the critical wounds grew gradually worse, while they were unable to do anything against it. "How is it?" Seth asked the demon beside him, who looked at a small crystal in his hoof-like hands. 150 small and 43 medium-sized souls. Not bad for 15 minutes work. Tunomol gave him the number of their spoils, the souls that had been collected by the formation he set up. The blacksmith suppressed a sigh. He was a little disappointed, but he realized that he was a little spoiled since he was previously able to buy great numbers of souls like this from Mole. "I guess getting medium-sized ones with this method is still good. Had he harvested them personally he might have gotten better results, but now that he hunted souls himself this method was much more convenient. How long would it take to kill and take souls one by one? He could just strengthen the medium souls using the small souls later on with the soul refinery. In the long run, he was making more this way. Alright, let's get inside and clean up." While the blacksmith entered the small dungeon, Tunomol stayed outside, collecting the corpses of the orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins, in case there were any useful ones among them. It was more advantageous to use their original bodies that were modified by the golem forge than build frames for all of them. Even if he wasn't giving them a soul, golems made of bodies could still make up for numbers. The cave dungeon below the garrison was a small dungeon with 5 floors that were no different from a natural cave. Originally, it was a low-level dungeon filled with simple monsters like bats and rats, and scorpions around level 15. It didn't have the size or age to sustain a lot of orc troops. As such, inside the dungeon were far fewer enemies than on the surface. It was hardly worth entering, except for the level 70 dungeon boss and master. Although he was a massive orc warrior, he had nothing to resist Seth and quickly lost his life when he was pierced by a stone needle. Not even 20 minutes after entering, Seth stood before the defenseless dungeon core, pondering. The top of his giant's rod was teetering above it, as it spat out a pitiful few silver coins. The orcs had really used up all the energy to get troops over. What the blacksmith was pondering over was the future of the dungeon core. Should he destroy it and eradicate any chance for Kazdam to retake it? If he were to simply destroy all the cores on this journey, he was sure the dungeon god would get mad at him. He didn't mind offending some demon general, but getting the ire of a god rivaling the system god made him think twice. At one point he had threatened a core that he would come back and destroy it if it ever took a dragon newt as a dungeon master. If he did the same here, wouldn't the orcs just destroy a dungeon that wouldn't obey them? This could also fire back at him. Seth got one other idea as he thought about how to prevent Kazdam from taking the dungeon again. Take it himself. If he could go around claiming dungeon like Kazdam did and left a boss mob the orcs would have a hard time defeating, would this solve it? Opening a gate to Legion's space, a golem knight stepped out. It was one of his very first golem knights. One of those he had created from the giant monkey corpses he brought from Alpha. Despite their slow growth, this golem had enough time to reach level 92, while having stats that rivaled a player of the Oath Guard at level 99 in full armor. "Touch the dungeon core," he told the golem. "Accept him as your new dungeon master," he commanded the core once the gauntlet of the golem knight touched the crystal. However, despite threatening the core's existence, it glowed in a deep red and resisted doing so. Seth was a little taken aback. It had obediently spat out the money, but it vehemently denied taking the master Seth chose. Why? What was the difference between the dungeon empires that kept conquering dungeons and him? Does one need the blessing of the dungeon god to become a dungeon master? He finally asked the core in a voice that made it clear he could be reasoned with. Hesitatingly, the core started glowing a dim green light, which Seth counted as a yes. "All right, I will spare you for now," he said and decided to leave. The bard had an idea of what to try next. He actually felt stupid that he had not done it earlier. But this was not the dungeon or time to test it. This and the next few dungeons were just small ones at the border. By the time he was finished, that border would be pushed much further back. He would try it at a stronger dungeon. He left the dungeon and returned to Tunnamole. "Let's go to the next one," he said, looking at the map, where he was able to see all the quest markers for the quests he took. Chapter 999 Mustache Detection. Unclaimed Mountains. The ATV was struggling through the savage wind of the blizzard, but the group led by Mike made consistent progress on their path back to civilization. Since he had enough and more material for his divine quest, the beastman fully concentrated on keeping the group safe. While Kruger was driving the transporter, Mike stayed alert to fend off against the stealth hunters that made these mountains so incredibly dangerous. It was a profound trump card that allowed the champion of Mahis, a magnificent mustache. The item Seth had given them to detect the invisible agents of the scene back then. He brought one along just in case, and it was a great help during his travel alone in the snow. Although its range was not high, the mustache's detection was still more reliable than his eyes, ears, or nose in these terrifying snowstorms. Many times, they were able to evade monsters just in time to drive by and evade their attack. The ATV powered by magic crystals was able to reach frightening speeds, at a frightening consumption. Still, it was worth it, since it allowed them to even drive away from beasts ranging between leave 80 and 90. Yeah, the company originally got this as a prototype from Y-City. "It's the only reason I made it out alive," Kruger told him when Mike questioned him about his suspicion. Kruger was quite open about Y-City's involvement in the unclaimed mountain. They had been cut off from the world for weeks or months. They couldn't know about Mars conflict and the fall of Y-City. Apart from some idle talk and the ample excitement of escapes and battles, the journey was mostly a silent odyssey in a battle with mountains, the landscape, and the climate. The small mining towns and hamlets stayed silent when they came by. Maybe there were already no survivors anymore so far out. The route Mike took 2 weeks to walk melted away in a fraction of that time. The storm grew weaker and the climate became less volatile. They had gotten past the roughest part of the road, and more normal monsters started appearing. A sign that they had finally left the influence of the hashing birds. This was a blessing and a curse, since the mountains were filled with various kinds of monster birds and other flying beasts who were able to keep up with the ATV on the ground. As a prototype of technology, it was not built with any high-grade materials. Although it had a basic shield, it was way too flimsy for the current level inside the mountain range. "Sorry, I don't think I can repair it with my skill," one of the miners said after another attack that had left the ATV severely damaged. The man in question was the mine mechanic and had been able to do middling repairs to keep the vehicle running. However, after the last attack of a rock had destroyed the driver cabin and part of the energy circuitry, it was time to walk again. They were lucky, since it was only 2 or 3 days on foot to reach the last settlement Mike had met people at, a mining town called Addit 5. "I wasn't sure before, but as long as we keep going in this direction tomorrow, we should reach Addit 5 in the afternoon." Mike estimated their travel time in the evening after they walked for a day. The miners had eaten and rested well during the drive in the ATV, so their walking speed was quite good. "Let's camp here tonight and leave early morning to reach Addit 5, he suggested, because they reached an overhang where they would be dry and protected from the wind. Everyone agreed, relieved at the fact they would finally reach safety. After a quick meal, they got ready for the night, talking about what they would do when they finally reached the settlement. Mike laid out his padding and sleeping bag and fell asleep, or so it looked from the outside. In his bag, he secretly drank a stamina potion and waited vigilantly. While pretending to sleep, he heard the shuffling of feet in the darkness behind his back. He sighed inwardly as he waited for them to get closer. He wished he had been wrong. "Why aren't you sleeping, everyone?" Mike asked in a serious tone. The steps in the dark stopped, shocked. Sitting up in his sleeping bag, the beastman looked at the group of miners that had halted like caught thieves. Kruger shared a glance with the other miners before he spoke with a friendly smile. "I can't thank you enough in the name of all of us. We would not have gotten this far without you. To think we can reach safety tomorrow, truly, thank you. But it is time to drop the pretenses. Yeah, your charade has been crumbling for a while now, especially after we left the stormy mountains," Mike answered with a sigh. Actually, Mike already had his suspicions after only a few days of travel. On the whole way, he had never met a hashing bird again after they traveled together. He became really suspicious when he still couldn't contact Minasmar even after leaving the stormy area. Mike knew that they still had contact when he came through this place the first time. Someone was jamming his communications. But why did you drop the act now? It's not like you can beat me, the beastman asked as he stood up. Right, we probably can't. But our mission is already accomplished and all that is left is to get rid of the only witness, you. Even, especially if it costs us our lives, Kruger answered with a wry smile. Your mission is already accomplished? I have to disappoint you, there is no place called Addit 5 in this region. I led you to a deserted wasteland. Mike revealed that he had led them astray. When he had his doubts, he decided not to bring them back to the route he had taken. However, Kruger only smiled in derision. It does not matter. It was never our mission to reach civilization. Just to get out of the storm and spread the children. The children. Ah. We are apiaries, the last stage. We have already released the next generation of worms, far from the influence of the storms and Lambda, and infected all the settlements on the way here. Now we are just empty husks. Silencing you will be our last task, Kruger explained talkative. Mike stared at him, shocked. He had expected that there was something wrong with them. Maybe that they were already infected by the worms if the worms really did what they told him. This was why he wanted to stop them here, but, he had not expected that he was the one who had already released another scourge onto Earth. But there was one thing Kruger said, that caught his attention. Lambda? Isn't that another district? He asked. As a foreigner, he didn't quite know all the names and places on Earth, only the ones that came up often. The Great Lambda, home of the machine gods. Sitting in their towers of glass and steel, they look down on us as they try to find the secret of life. For a moment Kruger's voice became weird and mechanical as he spoke of the place with great resentment. Enough talking. You will have to join us today, Mike. Kruger's head still spoke, after it was already lopped off by White Hilt. In the back, his headless body sank to the ground. The stump of his neck was a mix of burned flesh and molten metal. The Minder stepped back in shock when Mike revealed his true strength. A giant lion, wielding a flaming sword, clad in a savage aura. A storm suddenly erupted in the cave, extinguishing the campfires that had previously illuminated the scene in a flickering orange glow. Now there was only the flaming sword and the lion. The miners attacked, much stronger than they should have been in their state. Mike finally tried to check their status but found that Observe actually couldn't tell that there was something wrong with them. It was as if they were strengthened by equipment. Despite being unnaturally strong, they could only watch the lion in the darkness, as he hacked them apart with his flaming sword. Mike killed them all then and there, but it didn't help alleviate the guilt in his conscience. He had unleashed another danger on Earth. Chapter 1000 Heartseeker. Holy Land, 3 days later. Riding a giant boar, the ONI general came before the great gates of the Orc town. It was a huge fortified settlement surrounded by 15 m high city walls and a barrier. It was a frontier city at the edge of Kazdam's heartland on Earth. Halt, who are you? What do you want at Guruk's Haven? The guard grunted, brandishing its weapon against the mounted visitor. I'm General Vigu under Prince Durzub, I have concerning news, the ONI announced pridefully. Nice try. General Vigu died during a campaign more than a year ago, the guard said snarly. Vigu brandished his axe and his aura descended on the guard. Do not mock me. I did not die but was held prisoner by the demon maestro. A terrifying being recently attacked his territory which finally gave me the chance to escape. But the same entity seems to have turned against our kingdom. I only found empty and destroyed garrisons and settlements on my way here. This one could be the next. Vigu spoke with feverish valor and conviction. The guard couldn't help but believe him. We will report your arrival to the city lord, the guard that stayed silent so far finally said disgruntled. He will decide whether we should believe or capture you. So this was what you meant when you said that we were not alone. I thought you were only speaking of your golem, but I didn't expect you had other companions in your ring, Tanamol commented, as they visited Vigu enter the city from a distance. Yeah, I called him before I picked you up. I thought he would be helpful to get past the defense of some of these. After all, they didn't want any of them to retreat into the dungeon and escape. It was best if they all died in the circumference of the soul collection formation the demon had deployed. For this, it was not helpful if he had to attack the barrier several times before it fell. Vigu was their Trojan horse, that helped them get in and past the defenses. Seth didn't doubt the Oni's loyalty at any point since he was resurrected using a divine skill. Soon, soldiers started quickly popping up on the walls of the city. It seemed that Vigu had successfully persuaded the city lord of the truth and urgency of his news. The whole city had been alerted. Even among orcs, it was a standard procedure that civilians would stay in their houses while the soldiers manned the barricades. Seth knew this because he had a long talk with Vigu after he realized that he actually had an insider with him. He also asked him about the inner workings of being a multidimensional kingdom operation on the dungeon system. It was as he thought, only those blessed as dungeon monsters by the dungeon god were able to become the master of a dungeon. There were only 4 people in his inner circle who fulfilled that requirement. For one, Vigu still held that blessing of the dungeon gods, despite being resurrected with the seeds of Hades. Buzz, the Vespani general, and Angelique were the same as former dungeon monsters. Maybe Alzalsar was also able to take control of a dungeon since she was a boss when they first met, but he didn't know where she was currently. The crux of the matter was, that one needed this blessing, or they couldn't take control of the dungeon. Since he currently had only Vigu with him, he obviously didn't have him take control of some random dungeon. After laying waste to 43 smaller settlements and garrisons, this was the first dungeon they would consider taking over. Below this city was a traditional labyrinthine Leave 80 dungeon with 70 floors. Accordingly, the orcs in the city and the dungeon had a standard of Leave 75-80. At least the warriors did. It was around Leave 65 for the civilians. Vigu had confirmed these numbers he had from the guild quest. Since Vigu prepared the dish, let's dig in. Seth started making gestures with his hands and a wall of fire started growing in view of the city. From this blazing gate stepped a giant figure. The severely underutilized summoning of the fire giant that was part of the set effect of the Trignus gloves finally came into play. What appeared was a giant humanoid with flaming red skin and magma black armor. A brightly burning beard gave the otherwise almost featureless face a character. The only other feature was the brightly burning eyes. With the roaring of a wildfire, the giant started moving toward the city. Where they had been previously just alerted, they were now in an emergency state that brought all the warriors to the surface. Skills and magic were shooting toward the fiery giant as he walked toward the city wall, to tear it down. What do you think? How long will Vigu take to? Tinamol's question ended mid-sentence when the city barrier started flickering and vanished. That was how long Vigu took to kill the city lord and get rid of the core of the barrier. The fire giant had just been a distraction, within a ruse. Well, it was not a complete distraction, as Seth and the fire giant lifted their arms at the same time, as they conjured the draconic titan flame. It rained on the city within the barrier, only sparing the residence of the city lord, prominently situated on the central ridge of the city. In dismay, the orc warriors were forced to watch as all they wished to protect was swallowed by flames within seconds. As they turned to watch the city burn, a light also appeared on their backs. A great show of light rays flooded the city walls. The blacksmith had used Apollo's Rain of Light, thrice, spending a whopping 15,000 mana. Seth had deliberately used pyromancy to light the city, to save mana for this move. Ding! Title: Sworn Enemy of Kazdam gained. You have killed over 5,000 citizens of Kazdam. People of Kazdam will feel hostile to you automatically. You have gained 500p power of existence. Ding! Your title, Goblin Hunter, has become Goblin Slayer. You have killed over 3,000 goblins plus 50% damage against goblins. Ding! Title: Orc Hunter gained. You have killed over 1,000 orcs plus 20% damage against orcs. Ding! You have fulfilled a hidden condition. You have killed over 5,000 goblin kin. Mind Reaper is evolving. Heartseeker, Mind Reaper. Unique, Ego. Physical damage, 1,500, new plus 200. Mag damage, 450, new. Durability, 3,500, new plus 500. One arrow's shot with this bow show great malice and will out of their way to hit vital points. 2 inflicted wounds will cause terrifying pain. Won't heal naturally but start decaying. Have a high chance of infection and poisoning. 3 plus 75% damage against goblin kind. 4.65% chance to cause mind disruption on hit, effects, stun/confusion/terror. 5.25% chance of causing mind decay on hit. 6.8% chance to cause soul decay. 7 active skill, Life Reaper. 8 active skill, Heartseeker. A terrifying weapon made by the devious hands of Master Smith, the first master blacksmith and master enchanter of Earth. A bow that has developed a malicious ego that will do anything to kill its benefactor's enemies and torment them. If someone unworthy tries to use this bow, they will be hit by the curse of decay in body and mind. Usage requirements: Seth Smith / acknowledgement by Seth Smith, 90 strength. Seth listened to the notification, only to look at the bow in shock. He gripped the bow more securely. The bard had never expected that there would be hidden conditions that could evolve the items he made himself. His heart raced a little when he thought of how he obtained the soul for the bow. Back then, it had been the vengeful soul of one of the few survivors of his hometown. A woman who died as the toy of a group of goblins and an orc. It was one of the few souls he had gotten through the quest of the system. Thinking back, the condition of killing enough of her sworn enemies fit the original vengeful soul. Apart from several improvements, such as magical damage which was new, and the additional damage to goblin kind, there was also a new skill, fitting the name change. Active skill, Heartseeker no cost, cool down 10 minutes. A targeted shot, that will find the weakness of the target. Has a low chance to fail in killing the target. It was similar to the Life Reaper, but this one allowed Seth to shoot at a target instead of making an unarmed shot that would seek to kill the next best hostile enemy. It was better, even if it had a chance to fail, as it could at least indicate where the weak points might be, even if it didn't succeed in killing it. After calming down a little, he also looked at his new titles. Sworn Enemy of Kazdam was probably unavoidable. What came as a nice surprise was that it brought him power of existence. Though it was small, was getting his name out there by making alliances or enemies another way to farm points. Even if it was too much of a hassle. Another good news was that the title he had only recently gotten, Goblin Hunter, had already evolved thanks to his efforts over the past 3 days. The same efforts had also given him the Orc Hunter title, which was going to prove useful in the next 2 days when they continued their raids like this. As he was checking the titles and bow, the kill notifications kept going as warriors on the wall and citizens in the city kept dying to the flames and decay. And while Seth listened to their death notifications, the counter in Tunamol's hand went up. Today was a good day, the blacksmith thought to himself, and he watched the city burn to the ground.